Basically, I have 36 years of motorcycle transmission experience, and I had 10 years experience before I opened my own shop doing nothing but motorcycle transmissions. So we're all trained professionals, and this is all we do. We do nothing but motorcycle transmission. Okay, the Suzuki Hyabussa, it's probably the small block Chevy of the motorcycle world now. Everybody's using it. It's a very popular engine, makes a lot of horsepower. The biggest problem with the 99 to 07 Hayabussas is the second gear issue. They do have a little bit of undercut on third, fourth, fifth, and sixth gears, but they don't have any undercut on second gear. Now, second gear is a female gear. It's got 4 female slots in it, and it gets engaged by sixth gear. Second gear is a freewheeling gear that gets spun by the fixed second gear on the input shaft, and it spins that second gear output, and what mates it to the shaft is when the sixth gear slides over and the male dogs drop into the female slots. Now, without any undercut on there, what ends up happening is that, again, as you shift it, you don't always hit the window of the slots. You might hit the bridge in between the slots, and this happens from the moment it leaves the showroom floor. Takes milliseconds for this to happen. You don't ever notice it at first, but as you ride it, the more you ride it, the more it will do this skipping over. And like I said, it takes milliseconds, so you don't even notice it. But as you're using it, it's using itself up. And it gets to the point that it rounds the leading edge of the sixth gear dogs, and it rounds the slot. And then eventually it gets to the point where it pushes itself out of gear. It'll get to a point where you get to an RPM, say 7,000 RPM maybe, and it just won't hold anymore. And then it ratchets, where it jumps out of gear, jumps in gear, jumps out of gear, jumps in gear. Feels like your chain is skipping over. And what undercutting does is it takes care of that problem in that it allows it to centrifugally pull itself into gear. So all of this skipping over that takes place is eliminated. And with eliminating that, you eliminate the wear characteristics, because as it skips over, it wears. As it wears, it skips over, and then it gets to the point where it finally ratchets. And when it's ratcheting, the sixth gear is going in and out, in and out, in and out of that second gear. And then the undercutting will take care of that problem. The rest of the gears have undercut on them. Second gear is the gear that's going to give you the most trouble because it's got the most foot-pounds of torque generated through the gearbox of any shift, because it is the lowest ratio shift that takes place. So second gear will raise its ugly head first, but you can have other gears that have equal amount of wear to them, but they're not giving you issues yet, because the second gear, again, gets the most foot-pounds of torque generated through it. So you could have as much wear on the other gears, but they don't give you problems right off the bat like this one, like second gear will. So addressing just second gear is basically like, putting a finger in the dike. You stop the leak, but you still have a problem. Addressing the entire gearbox, doing it right the first time, one time, then you don't have to go back in and repair the transmission again. We offer different types of modifications based on the horsepower level and the application, from your basic everyday street bike all the way up to your 1100 horsepower land speed bike, and all of your pro street type applications. We have different things that we do for each level of power. Your normal street bike would be just a Magnaflux inspection to make sure nothing was cracked, make sure the shafts were true, and then an undercutting of the gearbox. You start getting into things like air shifters. There's a circlip modification that we do to beef up the circlips, because if your air shifter fails to kill the ignition on the third gear shift and the fourth gear shift, it will push against that gear. Third and fourth gear back up against each other, back to back. They're freewheeling gears. They spin on a bushing, and there's a circlip in front of each one. Now, what is the front side circlip for third gear is actually also the backside circlip for fourth gear, and vice versa. So if your air shifter fails to kill, that male dog set has to drop into that spinning female gear, and it won't. It'll run over the tops of the slots. It'll side load that gear, which will side load the other gear, and it will blow the circlip out of the groove. It'll put it in 2 gears at one time, and it will grenade the gearbox. So a heavy-duty circlip modification will take care of that problem. If you ever have any issues with your air shifter, your bike just won't shift. It won't blow the transmission up. Now, when you get into high horsepower applications, we heat treat the gears, stress relieve them, and anneal them, take some temper out of them so they can absorb shock. Our normal race cut is our street cut. Our race cut is called our pro cut. And in that, we heat treat the gears as well as undercutting them. And we also back taper the tops of the dogs with a slight back taper so that if they do hit dog to dog, it will allow it to slide down in. A bike with an air shifter with our standard race cut, you can run 70 milliseconds of kill time. With the pro cut, you can turn it down to 50. We do have guys that squeeze them down to 30. They're nipping the dogs a little bit, but in a turbo bike, 20 milliseconds of kill time can equal 3 to 5 pounds of boost loss during each gear change. So it equals horsepower. And so some of the guys squeeze them tight and they get them touched up every year. But, for your normal usage, 50 milliseconds is a good starting point. We also do things when you start to get into a very high horsepower application. What happens is you can run into shift drum bind. And now this mainly takes place on a bike with an air shifter because they're shifting so quickly. And what happens is the shift drum is not cut to allow it to go into gear all the way. They go and they put themselves into gear about 3/4 of the way, maybe 7/8 of the way. And they don't go in and bottom. And what happens is as the horsepower goes up, so does the centrifugal pull of the undercut. So the more horsepower, the more pull of the undercut. And if you've seen guys that as they increase their nitrous load or they increase their boost, that they have to increase their engine kill time, the reason for that is called drum bind. And what happens is the gear that the shift fork goes into, so let's say second gear, the sixth gear, the shift fork goes into sixth gear. Sixth gear moves over and engages second gear and goes as far as the slot on the drum will allow it to go. Then the horsepower takes over and it tries to pull that sixth gear all the way into second gear. But the shift drum limits the travel of how far that sixth gear can go. So it pulls the sixth gear over, it pulls the shift fork over, and the pin on the shift fork where it rides in the slot on the drum will get up against the side of the slot of the drum so hard that you have to run more kill time to relax that shift fork so that the drum will rotate. Now on a bike, a drag bike that had, say, an automatic transmission in there, it just flat won't shift because there is no kill at all to take that power, take that load off of it. And so we remachine the shift drums to allow them to go in all the way. So theoretically, if you were going down the track and you could reach into the gearbox, you could grab that shift fork and wiggle it. It wouldn't be pinned tight against the side of the drum. So it makes for quicker shifting without getting into that shift drum bind. Also, when we do that, we increase the engagement on some of the gears so much there is a little bit of gear clearancing that we have to do. Other things that we do with the Hyabussa, and this is mainly for like a pro street type application or a grudge application, you take those bikes and you stretch them as far as you can, and you go ahead and you put all the weight in the nose, you put as much stuff up in the front of the bike as you can to get the bike heavy in the nose, and what ends up happening is they get light in the rear. And the trade-off is you get a better 60-foot time, which equates out the back door tremendously because anything you win or lose in the first 60 feet doubles by the time you get out the back door. So that's why that part of the run is the most important. The trade-off is because the bike gets lighter as the ass end gets lighter as you get down the track. So you're not transferring as much weight to the rear wheel. So by the time you get to fifth gear, the ass end is really light and they spin the tire. Most pro street bikes will spin the tire in fifth gear. And then what happens when it spins the tire is the motor drives the transmission from one side. The rear wheel drives it from the other side. So you've got your engagement side, which is undercut, to help pull it into gear. But when you kill the ignition while it's spinning the tire, you unload that gear from the drive side. But the rear wheel spinning in those milliseconds of kill time, as soon as you hit the button, as soon as it unloads on the drive side, the rear wheel spools up and will pin that gear on the back side. So before that gear can back off and move over and engage the next gear, the freewheeling back tire will spin it up, and the stock undercut that's on the back side of the dog is enough to hold it from going from fifth to sixth gear. The same gear that engages fifth gear engages sixth gear. So if it spins a tire, it won't want to shift from fifth to sixth because the stock undercut that's on the back side of the dog, your fifth gear and your sixth gear, as well as their mates, third and fourth, have a little bit of undercut from the factory on both sides, accel and decel. And the decel side is what gets hit when the rear tire spins. So what happens is that stock undercut on the back side is enough to hold it in a gear, so that when you go to hit the button, you might have to hit the button a couple times to hit high gear. And that's because the rear wheel now is the driver, not the motor. And so what we do is we remove the stock undercut off the decel side, off the back side of the gears, so that if it spins the tire, it can pull itself out because there's no dovetail cut, no undercut on the backside of that dog to hold it in. So that pretty much takes care of the issue on those. Same kind of issues happens on the Gen 2s. The second gears do have some undercut on those, so they don't give you such problems right off the bat. But the factory undercuts are not all that good and all that precise. You're talking about parts that are made to a print that don't see each other till they get assembled. So they're not cut as mates. When we undercut them, we match them perfectly. We will use the same cutter to cut your second gear as your mating gear sixth. And the angles are matched perfectly. We fit every one. We check every one so that you get perfect engagement all the way across, top to bottom, on every dog in the transmission. Greatly increases the longevity. We do transmissions for you, like I said, your basic average street bike. We've done pro street bikes that run 680s at over 200. We've done land speed bikes that run 311 in a mile and a half with over 1,000 horsepower. Give us a call. Telephone number is 727-447-4552. My name is Mark, and I will answer the phone and talk to you.